everybody. Thanks for coming out. Someone's coming in right now. So let's hold up a sec. This is Burning Books. There's a restroom up here. You can use it whenever you need it. There's a couple things I'll mention that are coming up, and I'll put the flyers for that in this basket. Tomorrow night, Oren Langell is coming here. He's going to speak about this book that was released called Portraits of Struggle, which is about, it's like photojournalism going back into the 70s up to today. And he's also just come back from Chile documenting the Mapuche indigenous resistance down there. So it should be a really interesting event tomorrow night. A bunch of photographs and stuff like that. And then on Saturday is the next installment of the Justice for Geraldine and Martin event. That's on this side at the Meriwether. That's not here. It's at Meriwether Library, so you might want to check that out. That campaign is definitely something worth getting involved in, so take a look at it. Throw a couple of these in here. We're expanding. Somebody had come in and said, oh, I don't have any cash to chip in. If ever you don't have any cash to chip in, you can always throw a couple bucks at our expansion fund. We got the building next door. There's some windows that just went in this week. And this bookstore is going to be 3 times the size with a 99-person event space in back, thanks to your support over the years. So that's happening. Yeah? Oh, that's just, okay, celebration?
No, there's rocking going on through the speakers still.
There's rocking going on through the speakers? Well, it's public enemy, I guess.
I didn't know the expanded space is going to have windows. That's a little high tech for us.
I know. So I'm going to pass this around.
Yeah.
Daryle came a decent distance, and we're just going to help him out. So if you can chip in, that'd be great. And then when it's all done, if you could bring it back up here, and we'll just set it up here, so it's not just like floating around the room afterwards. I don't know what else to say other than I've known Daryle my entire activist career, which is longer than I'd like to admit. Daryle's been around a long time. Fighting these people that seem to be a major problem these days in particular. So I think it's a really relevant event right now, and really happy to have him. So let's give him a warm welcome.
His entire activist life.
His entire activist life.
I'm old. and I appreciate that. I got to tell you, normally I don't really have notes or anything like that, but there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about and I didn't want to miss it. So I put it down here so I'm going to start off talking from here at first, and then I'm just going to riff because I can riff. If there's one thing I learned about when I was speaking at Niagara last night, I can riff. So, and I really didn't need to write this down, but I wanted to just say, first off, I want to thank Leslie and Burning Books for inviting me here to talk to all of you. We met at the Binghamton Anarchist book fair. Yep. And I was telling them that I need to just go out more and talk to people, and it was and they helped facilitate me speaking over at Niagara University last night, and that was great. I really had a great conversation with folks, and we could have gone on for hours, but time constraints. So in a couple of weeks, actually, I'm going to be on the road to Worthington, Ohio. I'm actually going to be speaking to some high school students. I've been speaking to this particular class for a number of years now via Zoom, and it's going to be the first time I'm actually going to be there in person in perfect timing because a neo-Nazi crew decided to march in Columbus, which is just down the road. I also used to live there, and while I was there, I was hooking up with Anti-Racist Action and really was able to just get some of my sea legs going. I infiltrated an anti-abortion crew who was protesting outside a clinic that my roommate was working at. And because I'm a Christian and I can follow along with what they're about, they had welcomed me in with open arms. And it was really interesting because I remember one time I went. They had a whole meeting, and there was a Father Frank Pavone that was going to be speaking at this meeting, and it was held at a cathedral. And I walked in. I didn't even get my foot through the door. This is how shameless they are. Didn't even get my foot through the door, and some woman came up to me and said, "We're so happy you're here," and I knew what was coming. We were just asking where were the African Americans in the pro-life movement. I'm biting the insides of my cheeks because I just saw this coming, and I was just like, all right, I got to be a spy, so I'll just shut up for now. And the worst about it, there was two things that were bad about it. One came later. The one that was immediate is that we found a cell of the Army of God when we when we did this infiltration. Had dinner with them and everything at their homes, had Bible study. The issue with the Army of God is an organization, it's a terrorist organization that believes in killing abortion providers and anyone in the LGBTQ community. And we found the crew of them and we put them on blast. And that's what we're going to talk about when it comes to my work, because One People's Project, my organization, really ushered in the age of doxing. And it started with this crew. It started with this crew that I was dealing with in Columbus. And we've been around for about 25 years as of next year. And it has been indeed a labor of love for us. Has been indeed. And I just want to tell you, I'm especially happy to be here because it gives me an opportunity to talk to y'all, but most importantly, an opportunity to big up independent bookstores. I love this spot, and we seldom talk about it, but bookstores such as this have become a refuge for a lot of people, which is why I'm glad to hear that y'all expanding. It's a physical space where we can find not only the books we're looking for when we can not find them anywhere else, but without the corporate interests we do not want to support. But it is also where we can find others who share the same concerns and the ones that we all have and want to coordinate efforts to take them forward. There are a few independent coffee houses here and there, and that's cool. But the bookstores have been ideal because they come with so much more, you know. I mean, we have Burning Books. We have Wooden Shoe in Philly. We have Red Emma's in Baltimore, which is actually a coffee house now because they expanded. We got Boxcar Books in Bloomington, Indiana. Want to give a shout out to Community Bookstore in Stone Mountain, Georgia, that just opened maybe a year or two ago. And these are places that I think that we need to remember to patronize, remember to support. I'm so glad that y'all supporting Burning Books as they do this expansion. And these are important staples to any community they're in, and a threat to the fascists that we deal with on a regular basis. That's why Red Ink in Providence was besieged by a group of neo-Nazis doing one of those little flash mobs things to come out and protest, and they did it twice because they recognized the threat that places like this have on them. And it's also why when you start talking about culture and building up a culture that they do not want you to build up, it's also why a fascist knucklehead attempted to attack a show down in Jersey that was to benefit my organization. He went to the show and tried to pepper spray people outside, tried to smoke bomb people outside, and ended up pepper spraying himself. So he's serving 8 years in jail because even though we don't call cops, the church that we was holding it in do. And that ended up in the news. I ended up having to explain to everybody on the news what Antifa was, and and he's sitting in jail for the next 8 years. And this is the thing that really bothers them. You're talking about a church. You're talking about a staple in the community, even before we even get to get to us, because they're accommodating us because they know that we are going to take this society and this community further. And that's what they're looking for whenever they help us out. and whenever they advance us, because they're not just helping us out, they are a part of this. It's not just us that's in the game; it's everybody. Even the people that are not here today, we're here for them in many respects, and it's that culture war that they always talked about. Remember, you used to hear Pat Buchanan talk about a culture war all the time back in the 30s. Again, I'm old. He was around back then. Back in the 90s, he was talking worse than anything you probably heard at Madison Square Garden a couple of weeks ago. And that's the thing. The thing that they know most importantly about this culture war is that they're losing. And they know they're losing despite who gets into office, because we are the people who don't give a damn about elections. We couldn't care less who you vote for. We know what we have to do. And that's the thing. We were going to do what we were going to do regardless of who won. If you are anti-fascist and you notice fascism was rearing its head in whatever direction this election was going in, and it's particularly if you're going major party. So the things that we are going to be talking about today is what we are going to talk about anyway. And being that the theme of this talk is about fighting fascism then and now, I was so glad to come here where a lot of the fight against fascism was front and center for over 100 years or so. I went to the Underground Railroad Museum over in Niagara Falls. I never heard of this place. And I found out about it because I spoke at Niagara and I met Professor Saladin Allah, who is the director at the museum. And I was told he was a descendant of a conductor of the Underground Railroad, and that Harriet Beecher Stowe used them as an inspiration for her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. I didn't catch a name when they told me this yesterday, and I didn't put two and two together. But then I go to the museum and found out that Professor Allah was an ancestor, or rather a descendant of Josiah Henson. Now, he was more than just Underground Railroad. He was before Underground Railroad. He and his family fled slavery, liberated themselves by crossing over into Canada, and founded a settlement and a school for others that were also finding themselves liberated. He did that before the Underground Railroad was even thought of. And I really got to say, I love this. I love this museum. I was only there for maybe like an hour, and it was a very worthwhile hour. But it's not the only thing that you had here, and you had a strong abolitionist bent here in Buffalo, here in Niagara Falls, and there was a lot of hardcore fights in that regard. They liberated a lot of people back then, and you can tell, you can see the story in the museum. There's one thing that's really interesting though that I found out. Native son Millard Fillmore was responsible for the boom, because when he signed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, that caused everybody to just run up into Canada. And he went on to be an anti-immigration activist, and he was working with Andrew Johnson in his Reconstruction efforts, which from Andrew Johnson's standpoint, he's a segregationist, didn't do anything for us. So Millard Fillmore, that was that dude, was that evil dude whose work we're still trying to beat back, even to this day. And it's interesting because now here I am wearing a shirt with an Ida B. Wells quote. She was here in 1906. W.E.B. Du Bois had started something called the Niagara Movement, kind of like morphed into the NAACP. And he founded that in 1905, and she became a member in 1906, and she came up here to promote it. So you have a lot of history here. The Niagara Movement is actually supposed to have their initial conference here in Buffalo, but they was worried about the opposition that they was getting from Booker T. Washington's people. Booker T. Washington just considered them to be radicals and was getting in the way and was ruining everything. It was basically, the Niagara movement was his Antifa. So they said, but in those days they shot folks. So what they did was just simply go up across the river and had their conference in Fort Erie. So and now here we are today. Here we are, and we still have a nice little rich history of anti-fascism that we can still look at. That is straight up identified, unlike back then, identified as fascism. If I wasn't wearing this shirt, I'll probably be wearing the shirt of Rush Bella, aka Bela Lugosi, because he was one of the first anti-fascists. He started one of the first anti-fascist organizations against Mussolini, and he was always hardcore like that. So I wear his shirt as kind of like a clandestine Antifa shirt. But that gives you an idea. We've always had this fight. Whether you're talking about Cable Street in the UK, whether you're talking about dealing with the civil rights movement in the 60s, whether you're dealing with the McCarthy era, we've always had this fight. We always had those people who knew how to take these characters on. But let's talk about what we are doing now. Let's talk about what is more contemporary. Now, in the 80s, there is a book, I'm not sure if it's here, I think it is. It's called We Go Where They Go, The Story of Anti-Racist Action. Anti-Racist Action was an organization that was founded within the punk scene to basically chase the Nazis out. And they did much more than that. They was able to just identify the Nazis that they were supposed to go after, that they needed to go after. They started in 1989, and the rest, as they say, was history. Everything that they hate about Antifa, they basically set the standard for. That the fascists hate about Antifa, it's their fault. And I was a part of that for a little while. Columbus was a nice little stronghold, even though it was founded in Minneapolis. But there was other groups. There was we got to show love to folks in Greensboro, North Carolina, who was murdered by the Klan as they protested them. We can't forget about them. We cannot forget, absolutely cannot forget the activity over a course of 5 to 10 years in Portland, Oregon. Also in 1989, after Mulugeta Sorrell was murdered by members of East Side White Pride. That sparked a huge war going back and forth where the Nazis saw one of their own getting taken out. I know people who were involved in that, and they're not, they don't brag about those actions. They rather it went a different way, and I don't blame them. I mean, it definitely takes a toll on you when you kill someone. Don't act like you're not going to have any remorse, no matter how bad the person is. You don't know how you're going to be when that happens, if that happens, and that's the deal. But they had to do what they had to do back then. But in this whole time, we also, when you look at 1999, we also lost 2 members of Anti-Racist Action in Las Vegas, Dan and Spit. And it took a while for justice to be meted out in that case. So we've had our hits. I mean, we've had our we've taken our shots, but we've also given some. I mean, we caused some hell whenever they had tried to march in or tried to hold a public meeting in York, Pennsylvania, back in 2012, and that was when they was really coming out after September 11th, really just coming out every month to just cause some damage to society, since they think they had an opportunity. And York, PA was a nice little parallel with Charlottesville, because you basically had 400 Nazis on one side and 400 Antifa on the other. There was a lot of clashes, and yes, there was somebody who drove his truck into a crowd of people. I don't think the only reason why he served 2 years, nobody died, but I think he only served 2 years because one of those people he hit was a cop. I don't even think the 9-year-old girl mattered to anybody, but when he hit that cop, that's what he went to jail for. But that was the kind of thing that we was dealing with for years. For years, we was just anti-racist action and One People's Project was basically just going all over the country. Any kind of Nazi rally or Klan rally that was happening within a 100-mile radius, we were there. Like the book says, we go where they go. So, and when I was younger, if I can double back to the 90s, I wasn't even in a group. I was with a crew of skins, traditional skins, who basically just had it on, had the mindset that if you see a Nazi in our town, they have to go. You might see a black and white picture of me wearing a black jacket with an upside inverted flag and a whole bunch of pins. That belonged to one of them at one time. And he lost it in a fight in the street with some of us. And I wrote a story about that's in the book that's edited by Shane Burley called No Pass It On. And so you can read the story if you can get the book. But that's the kind of thing that we was basically accustomed to. So the early 2000s, we was just all over the place trying to make sure that we keep these characters at bay. One People's Project started in 2000. Why? Because we did not see a lot of this activity going on in New Jersey and in the New York area, and then all of a sudden we started to. A white supremacist rally was about to happen in Morristown, New Jersey, and we organized around it using a website, identifying those that we thought that were going to be there. And people had never saw anyone put together a website to do that. And after the rally in 2000, July 4th, 2000, we just kept it going. That's why I'm here today. We just kept it going. We just started identifying all kinds of, not just neo-Nazis, not just Klan, but also just people in the far right, folks that are in the mainstream. Our whole initial mission was to show how this kind of thing was connected to the mainstream of conservatism. Because as I said before, Pat Buchanan was a part of this. Pat Buchanan was mainstream. All of this nonsense. Now, enter a group called the Council of Conservative Citizens, and their board members, one of their board members, Jared Taylor, who started a newsletter called American Renaissance and held biannual conferences. His whole thing was to bring that brand of politics, that brand of fascism into the Beltway. You had, at the Council of Conservative Citizens used to have all kinds of elected officials from the right come and speak. And we're talking about folks like Trent Lott. Trent Lott got in trouble because he was an honorary member of the Council of Conservative Citizens. Council of Conservative Citizens was something that morphed out of the white citizens councils of the 60s. You know that whole thing about Abbott and DeSantis busing migrants up to Martha's Vineyard and all that? That actually started with the White Citizens Councils telling black families there's jobs up in Martha's Vineyard. They did that first. So that's the legacy that we were dealing with when the Council of Conservative Citizens came rolling along. But like I said, they had biannual conferences, and they were even shown on C-SPAN. You can even still find the old videos of the Council of Conservative Citizens and American Renaissance on C-SPAN where they talk about mass deportation. It seems like everything's just coming around today. Because I'll tell you, when the Minutemen came along in 2005 and really started pushing the whole anti-immigration thing, and it was basically patrolling the borders and all of that, that gave them an opportunity to basically say, okay, this is our time, we must seize it. Remember, here's something important. When you look at the Minutemen, there's a reason why back in the day I called it the Mini-Klan Project. Because David Duke did that for his Klan border patrols in the 70s. If you remember anything about the Minutemen, they was a group of anti-immigration activists, or rather anti-immigration knuckleheads that would basically patrol the border. And that's what the Klan did in the 1970s. So they was basically living that kind of life. And ever since 2005, they just simply would not let go of the kind of good life they tasted once they started seeing the mainstream of right wing basically embrace them. And then 2008 happened, and Barack Obama became president. Now, regardless of how you may feel about Barack Obama, A black man being elected president of the United States made them all just short circuit. They were the generation that made that happen, that allowed that to happen. They didn't know what to do, which is why we have Trump today. Because if you look at Trump, and I made this point yesterday, he is everything they have always said a president should not be, right? But it doesn't matter because it's all a part of what they want to do, or what they've always wanted to do. He's just an avenue. He's just a means to an end. So him doing one thing that Donald Trump has done would have ended everybody else's career. But it's different now. It's very different now because they don't know how to keep us from advancing. And this is the best chance they feel that they have to do that. If Trump is this popular with the folks that we're trying to reach, then we're going to support Trump. That's just the attitude that they have. I mean, Project 2025, we talked about it all year. I've been talking about it all my life because Heritage Foundation has been pushing it ever since they founded. All these right-wing think tanks have been pushing just that thing. And I mean, you take a look at Pete Hegseth, the guy who they nominate. They say that they're nominating to be the Secretary of Defense. His whole thing, they haven't talked about this, but I first came across him when he was trying to promote the idea of rewriting the Constitution, getting a convention of the states, which hasn't been done since the 1700s, and get everybody together to just basically rewrite the Constitution so that the left doesn't have as much say in it, as much advantages in it as we do today. So that's the kind of guy that they want in the as Secretary of Defense, but it's also something that predates anything that Trump was doing. They've been pushing for this for years. So it isn't about Trump. It isn't even about Project 2025. It's about them, and it's always been about them. But we got this. We got this. Because the truth of the matter is, you have to pay attention to who it is that they hate the most and who scares them the most. And that is us, the folks in this room, because we're looking at them. And when we look at them, we do not like what we see. And when we do not like what we see, we do something about that. I mean, Dennis Prager, hold on. Dennis Prager, the radio talk shit host that now has a so-called university, he wrote a column a couple of years ago. First, he's one of those folks that like to predict civil war in this country. But he once wrote an article, an op-ed piece, calling for liberals to join with conservatives so that they can beat their common enemy, the left. So I found it really interesting. I found it really interesting when I saw Bill Maher in one of his ads. Man, Bill Maher has been a problem for me for a very long time. And when you hear him talk, I mean, he is so bad. The Islamophobia that he is known for is benign compared to what he's been about lately. I mean, last year around this time, he did one of his little new rules and all of this, where he went on a rant about Western civilization. This is another thing I talked about last night. And if you ever hear the term Western civilization, it means white supremacy. If there was a group called Youth for Western Civilization, it was put together by a guy who spoke at a white supremacist conference this weekend. We're going to get to that conference. That's the American Renaissance Conference I mentioned earlier. And when he went on his rant, when Maher went on his rant on Western civilization, it was in defense of Israel and all of that, because he considered Israel to be a outpost for the West in the Middle East. You don't need an outpost for Western civilization in the Middle East. There's only two reasons why you need an outpost: when you're trading and when you're at war. And there's no trading going on in Gaza. There's no trading going on with the Middle East. And then you hear him run off at the face, and he makes it clear and this is on YouTube if you can find it, he makes it clear that he is not talking about black culture or Latino culture or Asian culture. He's talking about white people. He doesn't say white people except to say, yeah, and you hear the left always just complain. If they hear Western civilization, it just means white man bad to them. Okay. Okay. It just means white man to you, sure, but you're not going to say that because you know that we'll come for you for that. But that's Western civilization is just another code word. And when I heard him say that, I'm sitting there listening to him as he talks, going, everything he says is something I heard Richard Spencer say, almost word for word. And it gives you an idea of what it is and who it is we are dealing with. When you see Bill Maher, you're looking at white supremacy on HBO. So, and if he wants to pick a fight with me on it over it, and he won't, I'll be more than happy to engage. So this is the kind of thing that's that we have to be mindful of, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here today, because the fascism, fighting fascism today, is a little bit more not concealed, but rather more, I guess, I don't want to even say accepted. I think because they can hide behind Trump and hide behind some of the people that Trump had uplifted, a lot is basically being allowed. I think our mission is to make sure that they know otherwise. First of all, one of the things that we need to do is not wait. And like I said, I know we don't wait for elections, but we have to encourage communities to start being proactive right now, and stop. And don't worry about who wins the next election. Don't worry about the midterms. Democrats are going to lose it in 2 years. The Senate is not promising in 2 years. So whatever it is we're trying to get back, we're not going to get back that way. And 4 years from now, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows? And then there's the wild card of Trump might not even be in office that long. We don't know how he is going to fare over the next 4 years. He might get kicked out. He might pass away. But the bottom line is it won't matter because we have work to do. We have to figure out what direction we are going to go in. And that brings me to why I even started with the whole thing about the bookstores and how we should support them and burning books with the expansion and all of this. We have to start building up our own institutions. We have to go beyond the political process. People, that's what Occupy was about. Occupy was about trying to figure out how to address our concerns and our needs away from a corrupt political system. We can't, I mean, that's another thing that really pissed me off about Bill Maher back in the day. When all the Occupy encampments got shut down, he went on TV that says, now is the time for us to get out of the tents and start canvassing for Democratic candidates. And I said, and he called it a new rule. And I said, that's not the new rule. That's the same old shit. And it's a sign that, well, I think he intentionally didn't get it because he really didn't have anybody from Occupy on the show. He had a Tea Party on the show all day long. But Occupy, I think it only happened once. But that's okay. We have our own media. We can talk for ourselves. And the thing about Occupy that was really important is that not only did it encourage people to establish something apart from the mainstream, apart from the contemporary, but it also started identifying who the real problem people were. And we really didn't even say the politicians were the problem people. We said the banks. The banks are what fuels this corrupt political system that we're trying to fight. The banks fuel a lot of things that we're trying to fight. And we focused on them, pointed out that we are the 99%, they are the 1%, and we are against anything that they are foisting upon us, and we gotta fight it. And we cannot fight it in the contemporary way. Of course, the Tea Party crowd came up with this nonsense about how we are the 53%, i.e. we're the ones that pay the taxes in this country. and you don't, it's like, oh, come on, man. You definitely missed the point on that, especially when you consider that military people also don't pay federal taxes either. You want to argue with them? But that's neither here nor there. I mean, my attitude about Occupy is that we did, in fact, start something, and we have to maintain it, and I'll tell you why. Minimum wage is still at $7. When we were fighting for 15 before the Democrats thought it was a good slogan. I mean, they chased us off they shut down all of our encampments because we were fighting for a raised minimum wage. And then they started with this thing called Fight for 15 when they didn't really have to fight. All they had to do was implement it. And when they had the opportunity a few years back to make it happen, it was one of them that shut it down, Christian Cinema, with a curtsy. Which is one of the reasons why we say you cannot rely on the political process. They're not your friends. I mean, I don't know how many times we have to make that point, but we'll keep making it, we'll keep reinforcing it, but most importantly, we will keep producing. And I think that's really what matters. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. It's good to read, good to learn, good to talk amongst ourselves. But then, at some point, we have to go out and do what we think needs to be done. That means we have to, if we have food ghettos, we have to start building up places where people can get food. If we have, if they're going to abolish the Department of Education, and I guarantee in about 4 years it will still be there. Department of Education will still be there, but but they're threatening it. If they're going to go after education in general and tell us what we can teach, especially black people, then it's like we got our own schools. In fact, one of our members, Beth Foster, has a thing out in rural Kentucky called the Foster Woods School. She started that up, and it's been doing good. And she needs support too. She has a school that's going to talk progressive politics, and progressive is being benign when it comes to Beth. But it's probably underscoring the fact. But the truth of the matter is, she's setting this up so we don't have to rely on whatever Ron DeSantis says should happen. And she's in Kentucky, so luckily they have a governor that's not going to get in the way, but it's only a matter of time before somebody gets there that will try to. We also have to build our defenses up. And when I say defenses, you're talking about people who keep calling for a civil war. You're talking about Proud Boys that are going to be pardoned by Trump next year, that are going to be back in the streets trying to cause some havoc. I'm in Buffalo, and I was worried about what family members I might have lost at that grocery store because they went to that grocery store on a regular. And to that dude whose name I don't remember, don't need to remember it, but I read his manifesto, and he said that he was doing it because of the criminal element that is in the black community, but everyone he killed, no one he killed was a part of that. Not that it would have been better, but the fact that it didn't matter. These were folks that were contributing to their communities, that were taking care of their families, and he killed them just because he saw black skin. So just understand, in case you haven't picked up on it, that whole thing about going after black people because we're a criminal element is just a lie and just a dodge to just justify their BS. And you know that's the case whenever they try to tell us that we can't even teach our own history and calling it CRT. Ironically, critical race theory is about studying how they use racism to advance their institutions. And when you're telling us that your schools will not teach history that incorporates the accomplishments of people of color and others, that's what critical race theory addresses, and you pretty much prove the theory every time you do that crap. But knowing that is one thing. Stopping them is another, and that's the thing that we got to do. But we don't have to wait until we win that war. We can still, as I said, build up our own schools, make sure that whatever's missing in our curriculums, we fill in the gaps. My parents did that. They had me reading when I was 2 years old. I started recognizing shapes and words when I was 2 years old. Did that to all of us kids. Now I'm a writer. But it's funny because the family education was pretty much the family business, because they recognized how important that education would be, which is why I also have to add this. There's a lot of people on TV right now, especially from the right, and yes, Bill Maher too, who are trying to tell communities that they don't have to go to college. College education is not important. If you can get a job you can make tons of money as a plumber or as an auto mechanic, which is fine, which is cool. You can tell people that I don't have a problem with it until you tell them that you don't have to go to school. You know, when you start focusing on who is being educated and why they don't have to be, you're not an ally, you're not a friend, you're not helping anybody, especially since you have a college degree. And everybody that pushes that BS has a college degree. Mm-hmm. So if the educated is trying to tell you to be uneducated, that should be a red flag. Who said I love the uneducated? Didn't Trump say that? And let's bring it back to him for a minute, because, and remember, I'm always going. The original definition of fascism, and Mussolini said this, was the merger of the corporate with the state. Our biggest problem has been Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Charlie Kirk, who has never worked a day in his life, but can somehow lecture us because Foster Freeze gave him a couple of $1,000s to start Turning Point USA, and Donald Trump, all billionaires, all people who Mussolini was talking about. I'm doing a video about Marconi, and I'm calling him the first tech bro for a reason. He was the person who basically invented radio. He discovered radio, if you will, but he was the one that basically patented the first transmitters and responsible for a lot of the technology that we have today. He was a fascist, which is why I'm doing the video. He was in Mussolini's party. He supported the persecution of Jews in Germany. He died in 1935 or 37 or something like that. So he wasn't able to see the fruits of that labor. He used to, there was an institution that he would not allow Jews to be a part of, Jewish scientists to be a part of in Italy. He supported the invasion of Ethiopia under Haile Selassie, and actually has there's a movie theater. It's called it used to be called the Haile Selassie Theater, but before that, it was called Cinema Marconi because it was built by the fascists when they took over Ethiopia. I write about him because he was one of the corporatists that Mussolini worked with, and we see that, and we see the same kind of thing today. And be careful when people talk about Tesla. Tesla is another tech bro, and he operated operated in Jersey, where in a town that I work in called Rahway, and he went back and forth with Marconi on things about, particularly who has credit for inventing radio. But even he was a problem. He promoted eugenics. He believed that humanity should stop pursuing democracy. So I say in the video, tech bros are going to tech bro, because that's basically what we see in that. That's an early version of what Elon Musk is today, what Peter Thiel is today, the guy who gave us PayPal. you know. And it's basically reason why I wanted to have this conversation today is that I wanted to hear from everybody. I think it's about time we get into the footing where we do, in fact, build up our own institutions that will counter anything that they have coming our way. And I said earlier, and I went off the rails with it, but the whole thing about defense is going to be real important, especially if the whole thing about the mass deportations happen. Because we are going to have to protect people who are going to be, it's basically the fugitive slave law all over again. We don't know how bad it's going to be or if it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad for the folks that are unjustly deported. And I think it's going to be real important that we are there to keep that from happening at all costs. And then there's the other issues that we have to deal with. The fact that what's her name? Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mason is going to go after the first transgender woman in Congress, passing legislation directed just towards her because she might want to go to the bathroom at some point. First of all, that whole bathroom thing has got to be the pettiest thing that I have ever seen in politics. It's right up there with incels, but incels are another animal altogether. But when it started, I'm sitting there going, it ain't the first time they made a big deal about who goes into what bathroom, because civil rights movement was built around stopping that nonsense. But to come up with legislation for one person says a lot about how dysfunctional that crowd is. And we have got to exploit that dysfunction at some point, somehow, so that they do not cause us any other harm beyond what they're doing now. How do we do that? That's all depends on how active we are going to be. I said that one of the scariest things to them, proactive we are. That whole line that the Harris campaign said that when we fight, we win. They didn't fight.
Yeah.
They didn't fight. Mm-hmm. We fight, and we do win when we fight. But here's the other thing that I really gotta add: stop waiting for people to die. Now that is on us. That is on us. We cannot, Charlottesville, everybody started saying, okay, we got to do something about this element because Heather Heyer was killed. But there was a whole bunch of other things that was going on leading up to what happened in Charlottesville. And basically we was all like, okay, I'm glad to see that you're shutting down websites that you could have shut down 6 months ago. But it's kind of like a we told you so moment. January 6th was why aren't you listening? And the thing that really irks me about January 6th is that you had, after the election, the liberals who were going to try to play that game that they used to play back in the day where we can ignore them now. They're not going to cause any harm to anybody because we beat them, let them vent, just pay no attention to them. They were tearing down murals for Black Lives Matter. They were tearing down the posters that you had for people who were killed by the police. And the folks who were at the Black Lives Matter Plaza was like, where's all our allies? What happened? We said, well, the election's over and Trump lost. That was also when Proud Boys started stabbing people. That November, that was when Proud Boys started stabbing people. Then December 12th happened, and then we tried to come out a little bit more. That was the day where Enrique Tarrio and a few friends decided to go to Frederick Douglass Church, take down the Black Lives Matter banner that was on the church and set it on fire. They also tried to stab people there, but this time we stabbed them back. So we were listening. Then January 6th happened, and it was just like a massive thing for the liberals to say, stay away, don't let them vent and all of this nonsense. And I was like, no, we got to be out there. But everybody agreed that we got to be out there at that point, that we needed to stay away. Everybody except me. The only reason why I didn't go is because I had an eye doctor appointment that I forgot about. I got home and I saw them ending the count on C-SPAN, and I was like, oh boy, what's it? A protester getting loud and they got to shut down. And then when I saw what happened, I was just like, I should have been there. We should have been there. And people to this day says, well, I'm glad you weren't, because you would have been a part of all of that. I said, it wouldn't have happened if we were there. And I know this because on July 6, 2019, Antifa was out there and Proud Boys wanted to hold a rally, and we kept their asses on Freedom Plaza. They did not go any damn where because we were there ready to play. If we had that attitude on January 6th, we would not see what went down. And I will tell you this too: if you want to argue about if you want to listen to them try to tell people that Antifa was there, says no. If Antifa was there, if Antifa stormed that Capitol, we would still be there, because we know what would have happened if we had gotten out. We would have said, look, we're going to have to make this count. It didn't count for them. So, I mean, even if they're going to get pardoned, even if they was able to do some propaganda stuff over the next 4 years or so, if we went into the Capitol, first of all, we wouldn't even allowed to get that close. I mean, remember, Trump and his crew went after us in Lafayette Park when we were just sitting around. If we managed to get to the Capitol the way they got to the Capitol, one of us in this room probably would be president right now. So, don't worry, I don't want the job. But that's the attitude we have to have. That's where we are today. Now, the sycophants thinking that they're going to be able to go further than they did the last time. And we have to remind them, no, that ain't happening. That ain't happening. We don't want it to happen. And there, all those, yeah, but you only had like 74 million people that didn't vote for Kamala, or Kamala, as they would probably tell you. He says, yeah, but that's 74 million, and there's a whole bunch more, 3 times that much, that didn't vote, period, because they didn't think that it was worth it to. You know what is worth it to? Worth it for them? So, all right, here we are. But anyway, anybody had any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could say a few words about the worldwide fascist movement. For example, in Ukraine, my understanding is that people, fascists from all over the planet, have gone there to fight and to kill people.
You know, I think...
Could you incorporate the question into your...
Yes, you were asking about the worldwide, and I apologize because you asked me to do that before and I didn't do it, but but yes, in regards to your question about worldwide fascism and the people that are going to Ukraine to fight, I have been very careful about talking about Ukraine in that regard, because yes, Nazis have been a part of what's been going on in Ukraine, but that was before Zelensky. Now, whatever's going on in Ukraine right now politically, that's another animal. But the Nazis are also coming from Russia, and no one wants to talk about that. Alexander Dugin wants the Soviet Union to be created recreated as a fascist state, and that's one of Putin's boys. The thing is, Ukraine had a guy before Zelensky that was Putin's puppet, and then they chased him out.
He was democratically elected, whatever you think of that.
Yeah, well,
he was overthrown,
you know how politics
CIA,
go.
He was overthrown in a CIA coup.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that will have to be discussed. But the thing is, who are the bad guys in Russia and Ukraine? That would be the question that we will have to ask. And I try to be very careful when I say that everybody in Ukraine are Nazis.
No, I'm not saying that, but
Yeah. No, at least the fighters.
Nazism has been nurtured by the CIA in Ukraine since World War II.
Yeah,
and
yeah, it has.
Ever since.
That's why I say we got to look into it. We got to look at it soberly when it comes to that. So I've been very careful when I talked about that, because the issue is, when you look at both Russia and Ukraine, there's been problems. There has been huge problems. So who it is that we're standing up for? Bottom line is, my issue is always going to be with Putin. My issue will be with Putin because Putin wants to take every one of us in this room down too. And he's an oligarch. And the oligarchs are really the threat, the biggest threat that we have in this country. Now, when you talk about worldwide fascism, the conference that I talked about that happened last week in American Renaissance, they invite a lot of these characters to the United States to speak to our homegrown fascists on how they can build. We managed to keep 2 of them from coming over here. But yeah, we're looking at a lot of activity, I should say. I don't want to say growth, but activity in France, in Germany, and so on. So we got our hands full this year. In Hungary, in Turkey, you know.
Mm-hmm. So. If I can ask another one.
Sure.
What do you know about Randall Terry?
What do I know about Randall Terry? I met Randall Terry.
Yeah, my in-laws know him.
Well, I'm glad he lost. Do you know that? Who knows? Does everybody know who Randall Terry is? He was in the 80s. He was a nasty anti-abortion activist. I mean, he was supporting bombings if he wasn't bombing himself, and you know, he was a straight up terrorist. He was a straight up anti-abortion terrorist. And when I saw him, he was, I'm sorry for hitting that mic again, but when I saw him, he was rolling with the Tea Parties. He was rolling with the Tea Party in Virginia. The last time I saw him, he was on the ballot running for president. Right. And somehow he managed to get one of his anti-abortion commercials onto TV, and they had to follow, the station had to put a disclaimer on it because you were going to see images that, you know, something that we normally do not put on TV, but we have to per the law. Yeah, Randall.
Did I open a can of worms there?
Oh boy! I mean, in case you haven't noticed, I mean, when I talked about ARA and how I infiltrated the anti-abortion crowd, incidentally, I should point out that in Columbus there's a church that was run by a Pastor Frank Lutz, I think his name was, and he turned and. They're one of those pre-Vatican II supporting churches, if you know, I mean, the more right-wing churches, the more fascist kind of church. He's one of those pastors that got popped for assaulting children. And I found that out just a couple of years ago. So when you look at a lot of these idiots that are saying that they're pro-life when they're not, saying that they're protecting children when they're not, that gives you more of an incentive to do something about this crowd. Yes?
I'm wondering about what you were like as a kid and a teenager, and like what were those moments for you that really started as seeds for the work that you're doing now?
Well, I would say that when I was a kid, I was I was straight up nerd. I mean, my parents saw to it. My father, I was born in Newark, which can be a hard town, so hard, in fact, that when my father came home from the hospital the day I was born, he went to take a nap. As soon as his head hit the pillow, a bullet went right through the wall. It was a couple that was shooting at each other with rifles. So he packed up everything in a little Toyota and moved down to the suburbs, came back to the hospital. Hi, honey, we moved. And I grew up in Somerset, New Jersey, and I was able to grow up the way that my parents wanted me to grow up. And that's why I became a bookworm and growing up. And it was always funny because I always tell the story about, I used to read a lot when I was a kid about Martin Luther King and Black history and the Civil Rights Movement and all of that. And I was always wondering, well, what happened to the Klan after I was born? Remember, I was born in 1968, the year that Martin Luther King was murdered. So I was like, well, what happened after 1968? How come I don't see that anymore? And because I didn't think that everybody just said, okay, fine. we'll take off the suits, take off the sheets and stuff, and you know. I found out because our little weekly readers actually had an article about the Klan. This guy named Bill Wilkinson, who was the Grand Dragon at the time, the big guy in the 70s. And I was like, okay, so this is going on still. I'm 10, and I want to start monitoring these guys. So that's when I start waiting for TV shows like that will have like Tom Mesker, another Klan leader at the time, and David Duke and all of them. And then I was in the Air Force, and they started talking about skinheads. By the way, when I say not skinheads, I don't mean Nazis. Not skinheads. Skinhead culture is separate from Nazi culture. So we're just gonna make that clear right now. But back then, I didn't know that. I watched Oprah, had him on the show, and I was like, okay, I don't know what this crowd is, but I see Tom Mesker in the audience. I'm gonna have to keep an eye on this. And I started videotaping and archiving all the shows that they would be on. And then Geraldo came on, and then that infamous fight happened, so I documented that. And then I started listening to talk radio because I started hearing them say the same thing that those Klans and white supremacist groups started saying. I was like, okay, I'm going to start recording these shows. So I started listening to people like Bob Grant, who gets a shout out at that conference last weekend. Bob Grant was a radio talk show host from back in the day who used to be downright nasty, used to call Martin Luther King Jr. a bum, said that indigenous people should be lucky we let them survive. He hoped that George Halliday, who took Rodney King's video, gets what's coming to him. I mean, he was a mess, and I got all these still on tape. Matter of fact, I have them MP3'd on the one people on our website, one of our websites. So, I mean, so I started listening to talk radio. Then I started infiltrating their conferences, especially the anti-abortion conferences. Started going to this thing called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference in D.C., because that's where they all showed up. So, yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time. Okay, I'll get you, then you.
Okay, I hear you talking about the about us needing to build defenses. How do you feel about like fighting fire with fire, giving them a taste of their own blood that they spilled for so long?
Well, first and foremost, I would strongly suggest that when you are talking about defense, remember it is defense. You do not want to engage first. You don't want to draw that first blood because at least you wouldn't want to, I should say, because that just puts you in a position where they can come at you and just basically ruin everything about you and everything around you. You want to be careful how you engage. I guess that's the best way to put it. You want to be careful how you engage. But in regards to fighting fire with fire, if they come, however they come at me, I will come at them one level above what they bring. You know, that whole thing that you see on the Untouchables. He brings a knife, you bring a gun. You send 2 of them to the hospital, you send 6 of them to the morgue, that kind of thing. I mean, that's the attitude you have to have, but that's proverbially. You don't have to send people to the morgue. Hopefully you don't. But when you look at what the Proud Boys keep bringing to places like Portland and in other towns that they're in, you got to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for that. I am always strapped up when I'm not here in New York, where I can't be, but because I have to be prepared. I am on a few kill lists right now. So, and I did tell you about the whole thing that happened at the church during one of our shows. It was a hardcore show, no less. This guy actually thought he was going to attack a hardcore show by himself, and he ended up pepper spraying himself. So he became so it was made no difference anyway. But yeah, you just have to be mindful that you might have to engage that way, but gotta be smart about it. Just has to be smart about it.
What's your website?
I'm glad you say that because I'm always forgetting it. I have 3. There is onepeoplesproject.com. There is also idavox.com. IDAVOX.com is named after Ida B. Wells because we report on things that no one else wants to report on, just like Ida B. Wells. There's also rogues.wiki. That is our rogues gallery of various people in the past and present that we have, that we like to basically draw attention to so people can see who is who and what is what and how to take them down. So, and also we are on, while I'm at it, we're also on Instagram at One People's Project or at Audivox, or my personal one at D Lamont Jenkins. That's also the how you can find us on Threads. We're on Blue Sky, onepeoplesproject.bsky.social, and just add our name. And One People's Project on YouTube is One People's Project TV. Just look for that there. If you notice, I didn't do our Twitter handles because fuck them. But yes.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of people, I mean, especially working here, it seems like there's a lot of people who are just kind of like stunned right now. And you did address that a bit in your talk, but I just see people walking in here all day, ever since the election, just kind of like a deer in headlights almost.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've got any, and I'm also getting questions from people like, hey, what's gonna happen? When is the big date? When are people gonna get together? Where's the confrontation gonna be? In a general sense,
That right there, people asking that question is a positive thing because they're not going to sit down and just let shit happen.
Yeah.
That's what we need to hear. Yeah. When are we going to when's the next confrontation? Now, let's take that energy and build something.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to wait till the next fight. Sometimes you got to start the fight yourself, and then to your point, no, that doesn't mean go in the office and start smacking around Proud Boys whenever you see them. I did that in my younger days. Don't let them come at us first in that regard. But if you got people that want to do that, your attitude should be, okay, well, let's just start building so that we can protect ourselves when the time comes. The next confrontation should not be decided by them. It will be decided by us. So I love people saying that. When you talk about how people are stressed out, people are feeling down because of what happened a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that usually just turns into annoyance. But then, as you noted, we just get back to work. We said, okay, guess we got to do this again, and just take it from there. That's the only thing we can do. Anyone else? All right, I want to thank everybody for your time. I'm glad I came out here, y'all. I'm glad to see you.